Today, we're making a big Cedar bar sign, and the new bit we used is a game changer. As always, guys, if you've been watching us for a while, do us a favor, hit that subscribe button, hit the little bell icon. We're putting out a ton of content, and we got some really cool stuff coming up. So for the backgrounds in our signs, we always use, well, most of the time, we use the 90-degree bit. And if you're doing a really big sign, that can take a long time. That's where the new 3/8 90-degree bit really shines. This new bit, at the very least, cuts your background time in half. It's the exact same angle, it's 90 degrees, but it's quite a bit bigger and you can go a lot deeper with it. Another nice thing about this bit is that we will resharpen it. We offer bit sharpening if you buy the bits from us, and if you're a premium or executive member, you get that for free. You can check out the information for that right here. I'll leave a link in the description below for the new 90-degree bit, plus all of our other router bits and everything else we have to offer. Let's get to carving and see how this thing does. So for this sign, we're using our 6-inch Clarendon. We're also using the 9-inch beer mug. Now, what you're really looking for here is to have even space on the top and bottom of your line of wording. So once I got my initial mark made, then I use my little adjustable square to make marks on either side of the board and connect them with my straight edge. Then I just got to get my spacing. So same thing with top and bottom, we want even spacing from left to right, and you want even spacing between the letters. Now you want a little bit bigger of a space between the beer mug and the letters to show that it's two separate things. Because these are bowed a little bit, I'm going to use this little adhesive tape, and it's going to help me stick my letters down. But because they're so big and I have to do each one individually, I made marks on the top of each letter. That way all I have to do is line up the top and the bottom. Once I have everything laid out, then I'm going to spray it with my primer. Now, because these are so big, you don't really have to worry about moving the letters with the spray, but that's really tempting to overspray and get real close. You want to try to avoid that. That's one of the downfalls of doing larger signs like this. The great thing about that adhesive tape, as opposed to using spray adhesive, it sticks the letters on good enough to lay them out, but they're easy to take off. And if there's a little bit of residue left on the board, just use a pencil eraser and it comes right off. I started out with a profile bit at 1/4 of an inch deep. Now this is kind of one of those weird deals where the profile was a little too thin, but the 60 degree is a little too fat. So when you have a situation like that, what I do is I use the profile and I stay on one side of the carving. Just one side of the line. Then I can always come back and touch up the other side. When you start kind of going from the top to the bottom of the line, that's where you can end up getting some weird, funky lines, and it just doesn't look right. So try to stay consistent whether you carve the left side or the right side first, and then come back and get the opposite side. That way you take up the entire line and it's all nice and straight. Once the beer mug was done, then it's time to move over to my letters. Now, people tend to get a little bit intimidated when it comes to doing bigger projects, and I get it. If you mess up, then, you know, it's a lot of money, a lot of wood, and a lot of time if you put a board together that you wasted. However, something to realize is usually, not always, but usually big signs are actually easier to do because you're just taking all your wording and your artwork and you're doing it bigger. So that's less really small detail that you have to worry about. So just kind of keep that in mind. Now, that being said, when you're doing outset letters, you have a lot of room for error. So make sure that you leave a little bit of space between your line and the area that you're going to carve out. So like stay a little bit more onto the black, you can always feather your way back in. All right, so we got all the profile work done. Now we're gonna get ready to use the new 3/8 90-degree bit. Now this thing is really wide compared to our other 1/4 inch 90-degree bit, and it's gonna take out a ton of wood. So one thing I wanna make sure to do is stay away from my carving as much as I can. I'm actually gonna go in and give a big fat buffer zone before I start doing my texture. That way it'll help me to stay away from my carving as I'm kind of going around. So let's give her a shot.
I set the new bit at 1/4 inch deep, and I'm glad I did. You can definitely go deeper with this bit, but the width of that cut is a little bit difficult to get used to. It really takes out a ton of wood, and it throws some serious sawdust. I love this bit. I went around and I gave that buffer zone. I just had to be careful, like right there where the B and the E are touching. It got real tight, so you really want to make sure to take your time, because it would be easy, real easy, to take out a big chunk of your carving, and that is the last thing you want. So this situation was a little bit odd. You couldn't really think about each individual letter. You almost had to think of the spaces in between the letters as their own letter, if that makes sense. I'm trying to make it make sense. But you really want to pay attention when you're doing something like this. Now, because these letters are so big, it's going to be hard to keep track of where the cloud is. That's where this line was supposed to work. But the reality is, this thing throws so much sawdust, and it was just a pencil line. I probably should have used a Sharpie, that way I could see it a little bit better. But with all that sawdust flying, I was just kind of flying blind there, just taking a guess. Something Grandpa told me years ago is once you have the outline of your cloud, go back and do all of your interior stuff first, because it's really easy after all that work to forget something, like the middle of a B or the middle of an E or something like that. So do your cloud outline first, then go back, get all of your interior stuff done, and then come back and do the exterior of your cloud. Now, once this was done, I put a big fat line around the beer mug. That's not something we usually do, but we saw one of our students in our interactive courses do it, and it looked really good. So we decided to give it a shot on this, and it was a bit of a gamble because that big bit takes out so much wood, but I'm really happy with how it came out. So one thing I've noticed is I get in these weird modes every once in a while. I will like one thing for a while, and then I'll start to like something else. So I really wanted the scalloped edge on this sign. It's kind of intimidating when you haven't done it much or haven't done it in a while like I haven't, but really all you're doing is just doing a little hopscotch, just a little tiny bit of in and out, and you're trying to get that bit to line up with your last cut. It's really not that hard, and it gives it such a cool look. Once my edge was done, then we used the primer, and this is Cedar, so I didn't really worry about bleeding, but I was still trying to be careful not to overspray. When you have a lot of background like this, if one area is lighter than the other, it's real noticeable. So that's something to kind of keep in mind. One thing you want to try to do when you're sanding a big sign like this is always keep that sanding disc on as much surface as you can. So like when I did the top and the bottom, I tried to go even and have a little bit of that disc on the letters as well. Otherwise, you can start gouging your work and you get a lot of high spots. Man, I love cedar. It carves great, it smells great when you're carving it, and when you put a clear coat on it, that grain just pops. It just comes alive. I'm really liking this stuff. So we showed one coat, but we actually put maybe 10 or 12 coats on this thing. One of the biggest reasons for that is if you're going to paint a sign, you should definitely expect to get some drips on there, and you have to be able to wipe that off. Now, this is oil-based paint, it's one shot, and it works really well, but I definitely got some drips on there. If I didn't have 10 or 12 coats, whatever I have on there, if there wasn't a good solid buildup on there, then the paint would have soaked into the wood and there is no wiping that off. So, if you're going to do some painting, make sure that you have the ability to wipe off any drips.
So there it is, guys. I love the way this thing came out. Number one, it's cedar. You can't go wrong with cedar. It's such a beautiful wood. Now that new bit, it cut like a hot knife through butter, but I actually nicked some of the bottoms of the letters. If you look real close, you can see a little bit of waviness. Because this thing went so deep and cut so well, I didn't even notice it until after I had sanded it. So if you're gonna use this bit, you guys just make sure you do some practice work, and you know me, that's not my thing, but I probably should have practiced a little bit. You want to make sure that you're confident with it before you do a big project like this. So as always, I will leave links in the description below for everything we used today, including the 3/8 90-degree bit. If you guys haven't tried this on a big sign, it's a game changer. You can always email me with any questions, Ryan@makeitwoodsign.com, and we'll see you guys on the next one.